So I just want to go over these forms real quick with everybody. The forms that you're going to need for every single project that's submitted to our fair is Form 1, Form 1A, and Form 1B. So those are the three forms everyone needs. And so I'm just going to go through real quick the things that I'll be looking for when you turn your project in, just to make sure the paperwork has been completed properly. So the first one is the student name or names if you have a group. Project title goes here. And then the rest of this, all this here is for your teacher or sponsor. So the teacher will need to go through and say that they've looked at the rules and guidelines, they've reviewed your checklist, which is Form 1A, the research plan that goes with it, that they've worked with you to discuss the possible risks involved with the project. If the project involves humans, vertebrate animals, potentially hazardous biological agents, microorganisms, RDNA, or tissues, it's going to have special approval, and so they'll check that. And then for every single project, we're going to need the adult sponsor, the student checklist, the research plan, and the approval form. And then these other two, it depends. If you're working in a university setting or an industrial setting to do your project, we will need to have this checked here, and that'll require a separate form. And if you are continuing research from last year, you'll need to do the continuation research form. If you're using anything with humans, vertebrate animals, or potentially hazardous biological agents, there's going to be more checks to fill out down here by your teacher. For the most part, from the projects that are typically submitted to our fair for humans, all you really need is your IRB, which is your institutional review board. At our school, our institutional review board consists of our principal, it consists of our school nurse, and it consists of one science teacher. So that's going to be probably sufficient for you to just make sure that you go over it with them so that they are aware of what's going on with your research, and you've had 3 different people that are in positions of authority look it over so that they're confident that your project is safe and it's not going to hurt anybody when you carry out the experiment. The whole reason this paperwork is done is to ensure that a project that's being done is being done safely, and it's not going to cause any harm to the researcher, other people, to animals that you might be working with, etc. So we're just trying to be ethical with this paperwork. If you ever wonder why you have to fill out all this paperwork. Same thing with these. Some of you are just doing work on your farm. I don't think there's going to be any issues with that. Again, I would just have the institutional review board probably look that over for you. If you're doing something that's causing harm to the animal, or you're killing the animal and looking at the tissues, then you're going to have to go through a lot more paperwork in order to get the project approved. We need to follow the ethics very carefully here. So I would say, when possible, stay away from vertebrate animals or humans. But if you're doing basic studies, like we've had people do studies with chickens and looking at what they feed them to see what happens to the quality of the eggs, I don't see an issue with that. That's something that can probably be taken care of by the IRB. And if you're unsure, just talk to other people. We can send this off to our scientific review committee, which is established as part of having one of these fairs that are affiliated with the International Science and Engineering Fair. So if you do run into a situation like that, that's not a problem. Just make sure you email it and let us look that over, preferably before you start your experiment. That's the technical rules that go. If you overlook that, you need to get in touch with us right away so we can take a look at that for you. Okay, hazardous chemicals. If you are working with anything that's dangerous, you'll need to fill out that risk assessment form. So the best thing to do here is to look for the material safety data sheet for whatever substance you're working with, and look at the risks and make sure that you're aware of what those are. Qualified scientists, if you're working with something that has to be researched either in an institution or an industrial setting due to safety issues, you're going to need to make sure that you get this form filled out by someone with a doctorate degree. So in most high schools, your teacher is not going to be considered the qualified scientist. The qualified scientist is going to be someone that holds a doctorate. It could be a family doctor that you have. It could be a vet, but it has to have someone with a doctorate. And then if you're working with any materials that are DEA-controlled substances, you're going to want to consider that as well. So just make sure that we get a doctor approval on that so that they are supervising your project, and then they're responsible for those as well to make sure that we're controlling them as would be required by federal law. Okay, anything else? You can go with the risk assessment. And then the teacher or your sponsor needs to make sure that they check this box, basically saying they read this and they'll abide by the science fair ethics statement. So they put their name here, they sign it, they put the date they reviewed it, phone number, and email. Form 1A is going to be mostly on the students. So you'll put the team leader, whoever that is. If it's just you, that's okay. Just make sure that that's filled out. Put your grade, your email, phone number. School phone number is fine on this one. You really don't need your personal one. If I need to get in touch with you, I use email. And then if you have a team member, write them there. There is a spot that has a place for another team member, but our fair limits it to 2, so there shouldn't be anything filled out here. Put the title of your project here, the school's phone number, the school's address, and if you're not sure what those are, get on the internet and search those. It should be very easy to find. Put your adult sponsor name here. I'd say just put their email. There's probably no need for a phone number, but if you have a phone number, it's fine. Wants to know whether or not these projects are going to need pre-approval. So most of these projects that I've seen over the years really don't need any pre-approval from our fair, but make sure that if you are using humans or vertebrate animals, that you clear that with your school principal, your school nurse, and another teacher in the building that's not your science teacher. They make up the institutional review board, and just make sure that you have people look at it. What your tentative start date is, this would be for projects requiring pre-approval. If you're doing continuation, make sure you check that as a yes. And then when you do that, you'll have to make sure that you attach the previous year's abstract. And it'd be a good idea to attach the previous year's research plan or project summary. And then make sure that you explain how the project's different from what you've done before. So the whole idea here is that you don't just redo the same experiment, that instead you talk about how you've made some changes to it. So put the start date for this experiment and the end date. According to the rules, everything has to be done within the last calendar year. And if you haven't, if there's any questions on that, just email me. Make sure you put where you conduct it. Most people are either at school or home. If you do a research institution, keep in mind you have to have paperwork that's signed by whoever you're working with at the research institution. And then the source of data, typically it's collected, but sometimes we have people using data sets that are available online. So if that's the case, make sure you check other, describe it, and put where you got that information from. And then if for some reason you're doing anything outside of school or home, those addresses go here. And that will complete that side of the form. The other one that's sometimes missed, just because at the bottom here, you should have a project plan or summary attached. And what that looks like, if you just look at the very next page, so it's on the back of the form. This is what the research plan or project summary looks like. Now, we're not going to go through and look for each one of these for our particular fair, but if you do move on to the International Science and Engineering Fair, they'll expect this format to be followed. I'm just looking for a basic plan, what you're planning on doing. That's just part of the form. So I'll just thumb through that, make sure it's there, give it a quick read, and see if there's anything in particular we look at. This is actually very helpful for your teacher because it allows them to order materials and allows them to go over maybe some things that you hadn't thought of in terms of your experimental method, or maybe stop you from doing things that would be considered unsafe or unethical. So make sure that you do have a project plan summary with that as part of the paperwork. Okay, for the final piece of paperwork that everyone's going to need, it's the approval form 1B. That'll be your name, signature, date, and basically you're saying that you're going to practice safe research. You're going to follow all the rules that are in place for conducting research. So that means if you're working with vertebrate animals, if you're working with humans, there's a set of things that you need to really make sure you're paying attention to. And really what you're trying to do is minimize any harm to the people or the subjects that you're working with, or yourself, or both. And then your parent will need to sign on that. So make sure it's your parent signing this and not you forging it. It's usually pretty easy to tell these, so don't go there. Just make sure your parent signs it. It's good for them to know what you're doing. It doesn't take a whole lot of time to get this done, so just do the right thing. Now for number 2, unless you're doing something with vertebrate animals or you're doing something with humans or something that's potentially dangerous, like we looked at in the previous forms, you shouldn't need to fill this part out. If you do, you'd want your school's IRB. So this would be for most of them here. And again, IRB is simply a school administrator, another teacher, preferably a science teacher if you have one in the building. If not, just another teacher, and then the school nurse. Just have them look over it quick. Typically our chair, we have another science teacher here, so we have her sign this, but it could easily be your school administrator, principal, superintendent, someone like that. And we'll just need them signed. So if you're working with one of these things that are here, you'll need to have this filled out. If you're working at a regulated research institution like a UNK or one of the community colleges, you'll probably have to fill one of this section out here instead. But again, for most of these projects that are going to be submitted, this form is not used. And then for number 3, this will not apply to our fair. It's only if you go on to the International Science and Engineering Fair. For those projects that are chosen, we will have our SRC chair looked at this, and we may have to have this form completed again. That way we have the official SRC that's part of our board approve it before it's sent on to the International Science and Engineering Fair, because they do have a committee that will look at every single project and make sure that all the rules were followed. And that's what this part's for. So it's something that you won't need to do for our fair, but just be aware it's there.